This time travel story begins by showing a man named Nick who had come on vacation with his girlfriend for camping. Nick was accompanied by two other friends, Trevor and Amanda, who were also a couple and deeply in love with each other. Meanwhile, Nick really liked Julie and wanted to marry her and build a life together. Nick and Trevor often talked about how they would soon get promotions. In fact, both of them worked as executives in a software company and were about to receive promotions, which would also bring them a lot of money to improve their lives. Nick had shared all this with his girlfriend Julie, but while sitting with him, Julie said that she would be going to London to study photography. Nick did not like the idea of Julie leaving him at all, so he clearly told her that if he got the promotion, he would open an art gallery near their home where she could comfortably pursue her passion. Julie agreed to this and was willing to follow through with all these plans. The four of them were having a great time and enjoying their camping trip. But suddenly, Nick received a call from his company. They informed him that he needed to attend an important meeting because a very big client had come in, and Nick had to handle this meeting as soon as possible since it was his client. Nick could not refuse his company at this moment because his promotion was very close, and there was another employee named Bristol in the company who was his rival. The decision on who would get the promotion was about to be made, and Nick did not want to take any chances that could prevent him from getting it. Thus, it became Nick's compulsion to cancel his vacation and go back to the company to handle his client. However, Julie did not like this at all because Nick already didn't have much time, and now he was leaving them midway after coming on vacation after so long. Now all four of them were sitting in the car heading back to the city. Julie was taking photos of everyone with her small camera and having a lot of fun. He hadn't even fastened his seatbelt, but suddenly, the tire of the car that Nick was driving burst, and the car went completely out of control, coming to a stop right across the road. Nick tried to start the car, but it wouldn't work. At that moment, an out-of-control truck was speeding towards them from the opposite direction. Before Nick and the others could do anything, the truck collided directly with their car. The explosion was so loud that all the people inside were killed instantly. After the accident, a rescue team arrived and took everyone to the hospital. The next day, we see Nick lying in a bed, undergoing treatment. His mother, Catherine, was there, taking care of him. After a while, when Nick regained consciousness, he began asking about Julie and his other friends. With great sadness, Nick's mother, Catherine, told him that everyone except him had died in the accident. Hearing this, Nick was shocked. How could this happen? In just a moment, his entire world had come crashing down because he had promised to spend his whole life with Julie, and now he knew he would have to live alone forever. As time passed, Nick slowly recovered, but despite everything returning to normal, nothing felt right for him because the one he loved was gone. He now spent his days alone in his room, and he had become so despondent that he often looked at pictures of himself and Julie. One day, while gazing at a photo, he suddenly noticed that his and Julie's pictures were shaking. This was happening in a strange way, and seeing this shocked Nick, causing his mind to feel overwhelmed. Everything around him started to blur, and he dropped the photo frame. A little while later, Nick noticed a bit of blood coming from his nose. He couldn't make sense of what was happening and fainted right there. Slowly, a whole year passed. Nick was still working as a sales executive at his old company, but unfortunately, the promotion he was supposed to receive had gone to his rival candidate, Bristol, because the accident had happened at that time. So, that important meeting was conducted by Bristol instead of Nick, which resulted in the main promotion going to Bristol. Now, Bristol became Nick's boss and constantly belittled him. Bristol would come to Nick and angrily demand his presentation as soon as possible. He scolded Nick for everything and deducted points from him because, at one time, they were rival candidates. Nick had no other option but to continue his job this way. He listened to everything without complaining and focused on his work. Now, Nick was giving a presentation in front of important clients at his company. Everything was going smoothly, and Nick seemed quite confident. However, as soon as a photo appeared on the slide, he began to look at it closely. Suddenly, the photos started shaking, distracting Nick. His head began to ache again, and everything around him became blurry. The other clients were shocked to see Nick in this condition, wondering what was happening to him. Then blood started to flow from Nick's nose, and he fainted right there. When Nick's boss and Bristol learned about this, they were extremely angry because Nick's condition was causing the clients to refuse to deal with them. Bristol went on to complain more to his manager, saying that recent incidents involving Nick had increased. He seemed unwell, and because of this, they were losing many clients. This could cause significant damage to the company. Therefore, a decision was made to suspend Nick from his job for some time. Nick was now at home, feeling completely despondent. His professional life wasn't going well either, and he had no friends to support him in his sorrow. He spent his days alone at home. It became clear that Nick had been experiencing these episodes for the past year. Now, he began to look at photos of Julie on his computer because he missed her very much. As soon as he opened the photos of himself and Julie, everything started to repeat again, meaning the images began shaking again. Nick couldn't control himself this time and lost control of his mind. All the drinks on the table fell together, and he began to feel very weak and faint. But then, suddenly, it seemed like time was going backward because everything on the table returned to its place, and the hands on the clock started moving in reverse. In the next moment, when Nick opened his eyes, he found himself transported to the moment when he was driving back home with Julie and his two friends. He couldn't comprehend what was happening, but everything felt so real. Nick realized that this was the moment before the accident. Julie was taking photos as before, and she hadn't fastened her seatbelt. Nick immediately told Julie to buckle her seatbelt, and she did, but the car's tire blew out just like before, and they went out of control into the middle of the road. Nick was experiencing all of this, and he knew what was going to happen next. He quickly started the car so he could drive them forward. Suddenly, that same large truck came barreling toward them, heading straight for their car. The good news was that Nick managed to move the car forward, avoiding the collision, but they crashed into a tree, causing injuries to everyone inside. At that moment, Nick's eyes opened directly in his room. He noticed that his clothes had changed completely and his house looked entirely different. He felt as though he had somehow arrived at another place. However, after a short while, Julie's voice suddenly came from his house, and she appeared right in front of him. Nick was shocked and grabbed Julie, bursting into tears. He was incredibly happy to see her this way. Julie started to wonder why he was being so romantic suddenly. Eventually, the truth came out that he had married Julie, but she had no idea that Nick had come from another timeline. That meant Nick had come from a time when Julie and all his friends had died. Although Nick knew this, he didn't want to understand it too deeply. He was happy because he had Julie back. He had always imagined a life spent with her. Now, Julie told Nick that they needed to hurry to the restaurant because it was her birthday, and the celebration was going to take place there. Nick quickly reached the restaurant with Julie, where their friends Trevor and Amanda were also present. He was very happy to see them because both of them had died in the accident. But now, in this timeline Nick had returned to, they were all alive. Trevor talked to Nick, sharing that he was going to propose to Amanda soon. Nick wished Trevor all the best for his upcoming proposal. Later, when Nick had a moment alone with Julie, he tried to explain everything to her, how he had time traveled and come from a time when everyone had died. But Julie didn't really believe Nick. She thought he might be overthinking things. The next day, Nick returned to his job as a sales executive. At the same time, he began to investigate what had happened during the year when Julie and his two friends had not died. Nick tried to learn about time travel, alternate realities, and how these concepts actually worked. Despite all his research, he couldn't find a solution. After a while, he gave up on it. He had what he wanted, so why dig deeper into all these matters? Now, Nick and Trevor worked at the same company where they had both been employed. An important meeting was conducted in which Bristol mentioned that due to Trevor's poor performance, many of their clients were leaving. As a conclusion, it was decided that they would have to fire Trevor. Without any notice, Bristol fired Trevor, which Nick found very upsetting. He went straight to Bristol and said, "You're firing Trevor because you have a grudge against me." Bristol became furious at Nick's comment and fired him too. Nick happily left his job, but Trevor, upon meeting Nick, said, "You shouldn't have quit your job for me. This is your life, and this job is very important for you." However, Nick consoled Trevor, saying, "We can win our lives on our own terms. We shouldn't waste our time on this useless company." But when Julie learned about Nick quitting his job, she became very angry because their financial situation was not good. Nick had also promised Julie that he would go to London for further studies, which he failed to fulfill, and since then, their financial condition had been deteriorating. Eventually, Nick realized this, and he began to contemplate what to do. While he was taking out some drinks from the refrigerator, he noticed a photo of an office party where Bristol was also present. Nick thought again about time traveling back to the time when he could secure his promotion and job. He focused his mind and tried to connect with the timeline of that photo. In the next moment, Nick found himself in the timeline of the office party. At this time, Bristol had not yet received his promotion, so Nick continued with his plan. He took a drink and poured it on Bristol, distracting him so that he would go to the washroom. As soon as Bristol left, Nick quickly entered his office and took an important client file belonging to Bristol. Because in a short time, Bristol was going to receive his promotion based on that client, which he might never get now. As soon as Nick changed all these things, he suddenly found himself in the future, where blood was coming from his nose. But as Nick came back to his senses, he saw that he was wearing a very nice suit, and his office looked really great. Nick was astonished by the realization that he had indeed received a promotion in the future because he had changed his past accordingly. As Nick stepped out of his office, he noticed that Bristol was working under him and greeting Nick like his boss. This confirmed that the promotion was real. Nick had leveled up and was now working with a promotion. Nick started to belittle Bristol, just as Bristol had done to him before. Nick told Bristol to keep his desk clean and do all his work. Bristol had no choice but to comply with all these demands because Nick was now his boss. Then, the company manager called Nick and informed him that they had an important dinner meeting with a client, so he needed to get ready. Nick immediately prepared for this and started getting ready to go. First, he planned to go home, and as soon as he stepped out of the office, he realized he had a sports car, which made him feel really good. Nick sent a voice note to Julie, telling her that he would be home soon. He was happy that in this timeline, both his friends and Julie were safe and sound. Trevor had gone to a meeting with another client, and Nick reached home in no time. He was extremely excited because the house was very large and luxurious, indicating that he had become quite wealthy after receiving this promotion, and he had no financial worries at all. For Nick, this was the perfect life he had chosen or changed according to his wishes. Nick then went straight to the clients he was having dinner with, and he noticed that one of the clients had a daughter who was looking at him intently. When Nick entered the restroom after the meeting, the same girl followed him there. They both got close to each other, and after a while, Nick realized that they were having an affair. Nick's phone contained many photos of them together, indicating that in this timeline, Nick was cheating on Julie and building relationships with others. This realization didn't sit well with Nick, so he headed straight to the parking area to get to Julie. However, Julie wasn't answering his calls. Suddenly, his friend Trevor came running, badly injured. Trevor informed Nick that the client from whom they had taken an advance payment was extremely illegal, and now they were demanding all their money back. If they didn't return the money, they would kill all of them. Nick began to panic and asked Trevor where Julie was. Trevor then revealed the truth. They had broken up months ago, and they no longer lived together. Nick had tried to fix one thing by changing the past, but another thing had gone wrong. Realizing this, Nick immediately set out to rectify everything. He went to a fashion show to find out about Julie, where she was working as a photographer. However, Julie had changed her style a bit, so Nick couldn't recognize her at first. But eventually, he managed to find her and apologized. In this timeline, he discovered that Julie had a boyfriend who had funded the opening of her art gallery. Now, Julie explained to Nick that she had moved on with her life and didn't want to go back, so he should forget about her too. Nick felt terrible because all these changes were made to stay with Julie, and he had no idea that she would separate from him. Now, Nick went straight to the client who had invested in their scheme along with Trevor. This client was very dangerous, and their contacts were tied to the underworld. The clients were demanding all their investment money back from both of them, which Trevor might have already spent. Following the client's orders, his men began to beat Trevor right there and eventually killed him. Nick was also captured, but he managed to escape and started running away. Bullets were fired at Nick, but suddenly Julie appeared in front of him, and a bullet struck her instead. Julie was taking her last breaths, so Nick rushed her to the restroom. He absolutely did not want Julie to die, no matter what happened. Nick quickly took a photo of himself and Julie, hoping to use it to go back in time. He tried to maintain his concentration, but several men from the client came and snatched the phone away, distracting him. Nick was beaten badly and thrown out. The next day, when Nick regained consciousness, he somehow made his way to his mother and told her that he would save Trevor and Julie at any cost. However, Nick's mother, Catherine, told him that he couldn't control everything and no matter how many changes he made, some things would inevitably be left behind. She assured him that whatever happens will be for his own good. Nick began to understand his mother's words, so he went straight to Trevor's girlfriend, Amanda, and asked her for a photo from the time they all went camping together. Nick once again looked at that photo and went back to the timeline, specifically to the beginning of the story when they were all together. Once in that timeline, he was aware of all the possibilities and what changes could be expected in the future. He also anticipated that an accident would occur soon, so he told his girlfriend Julie to go to London to pursue her master's degree. He even discussed breaking up with her because he believed these were the best options for both of them. Julie felt very hurt by this and told Nick that she was going to be the mother of his child. Saying this, she got into a car and drove away angrily. Nick was now quite worried about Julie, so he got into another car and started chasing her. Both were speeding along, and at this parallel moment, Nick apologized to Julie, saying that he was doing everything for their own good. However, Julie had completely lost control. Suddenly, a car appeared in front of Nick, and he swerved to avoid it. Unfortunately, Nick's car brakes failed completely, and he fell straight down the mountain. Nick died in that accident, while Julie was safe at that moment. A few years later, we see a scene where Julie is feeding a child. This child is none other than Nick's son, whom Julie has named Nick as well. Here, we discover another reality. Nick's son possesses the same powers that Nick had. Nick's son was visualizing everything by looking at those photos, just as his father did when he traveled back in time. And thus, our butterfly effect story comes to an end.